I'm Dale Monroe, 39, U.S. Army captain, with 16 years in uniform. I've served across 3 continents, led men through dust storms in Iraq and sleepless winters in Poland. My father was a Marine. My grandfather served in Korea. I guess you could say service runs in my blood, but I never saw it as legacy. For me, it was always about duty. I believed in the mission, not the politics, not the medals, the mission, keeping my men safe, finishing the job, doing it with integrity. I've held the hands of soldiers as they bled out, written letters to mothers I never wanted to write. And through it all, I kept my boots polished and my conscience clean. I've never chased rank. I just did the work. Respect wasn't something I demanded. I earned it the hard way, through the mud, through the hours. Through every decision that came at 3 a.m. when a wrong call meant somebody didn't make it home. I didn't take shortcuts, and I never passed blame. I lived by the code because it wasn't just words on paper to me. It was who I was. That's why it hit me so hard when I got the news. It didn't come in a memo or a phone call, just a passing comment after a morning briefing. A new name had been added to the operations list, and mine was gone. No conversation, no explanation. Just like that, the position I'd built with sweat and sacrifice was handed off to someone else. And the man replacing me? Well, let's just say he wasn't exactly battle-tested. It happened on a Thursday morning, just after the operations review at Fort Bragg. I'd sat through a 2-hour strategy session, briefing logistics, personnel rotations, and upcoming readiness drills. Nothing unusual, just the job I'd done for years. When the meeting ended, I stood to gather my notes. That's when Colonel Barrett pulled me aside. He said it casual, like he was asking me to pass the salt. Effective immediately, you'll step back from active coordination. Captain Hayes will assume the command lead. No explanation, no discussion, just an order. I nodded, because that's what soldiers do. But inside, something cracked. Colton Hayes. 26, shiny boots, family name carried further than his combat record. Son of General Hayes, retired. I'd seen his type before, good on paper. Better at smiling through press briefings than leading men under fire. He hadn't seen what I'd seen. He hadn't earned what I'd bled for, and now he was taking my command. They told me to walk him through the briefings, show him the ropes. The same ropes I'd tied together through deployments and missed holidays. I handed over the comm logs, the secure access credentials, the supply chain templates I'd refined through trial and error in the field. I watched him skim the binders like they were breakfast menus. He thanked me, called me sir, said he looked forward to continuing my good work. I forced a nod. My jaw locked in place. I didn't trust myself to speak. There was nothing good about what was happening. This wasn't transition, it was erasure. No battle lost. No mission failed. Just someone up top deciding they wanted a different name on the report. I walked out of the command tent and stood on the gravel for a long time. The air was still, but something inside me felt stormy. I could hear my men laughing near the barracks. My name still meant something to them. But how long would that last? When the orders stopped coming from me, how long before I faded into rumor? That night, I cleared my field locker, stacked the folders in perfect order, just like I'd built the command structure. I left a note on top. Everything's here. He won't know what it means. But I do. Every chart, every highlighted section, every shorthand scribbled in the margins. That was me. That was years of lived experience. And now it belonged to someone who didn't even know where the fuel depot key was kept. The hardest part wasn't handing over the files. It was realizing that no one was going to fight for me to stay. Not a word. Not a raised hand. Just silence. That's how careers end sometimes. Not with disgrace. Just with quiet replacement. The next morning, my name was off the bulletin board. No more Monroe logistics lead. Just Hayes. In bold, like I'd never been there. Like I hadn't kept this unit together through supply crises, personnel losses, and months without proper rest. I didn't feel anger exactly. It was something colder, heavier, like being buried before you're even gone. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. First, it was the convoy schedules. Colton reversed the supply order timing without understanding why it was set that way. Trucks showed up without clearance. Food sat out too long in desert heat. Equipment meant for frontline teams ended up in rear posts. Logistics doesn't make headlines, but out there, it can mean life or death. The men started whispering. Missed patrol shifts, overlapping unit assignments, water rations miscounted. They didn't know who to report to anymore. One corporal asked me if we were changing protocols. I just shook my head. I wasn't in charge anymore. I watched the confusion spread like fog. Nobody trusted the new updates. But orders were orders, and they kept trying to follow them. Until they couldn't. By week 2, morale had dropped. The younger troops were frustrated. The veterans were angry. Colton showed up to morning brief in a crisp shirt and no field boots. He spoke in strategy lingo, synergy, optimization, alignment, and behind his back, someone muttered, "You can't lead a war zone with PowerPoints, sir." It stuck with me, because it was true. But more than that, it hurt. I had spent years building this machine to run smooth even under pressure. Now, every wheel was grinding against itself. He meant well, maybe, but meaning well doesn't save lives. Understanding the terrain, the rhythm of soldiers, the cost of a delayed order, that's what matters. And Colton had none of it. I sat in the comms tent one night, just listening to the radio static between platoons. Confused voices, missed signals, call-ins that didn't get logged. It was like watching a dam break, one crack at a time. And I couldn't patch it. I wasn't allowed to. All I could do was sit and watch what I'd built come apart in real time. The tipping point came quietly. No alarms, no shouting, just an email. Colton had authorized a logistics contract with Orion Tactical, a civilian vendor we'd used before under very specific terms. I'd been the one to draft those terms back in 2020. Buried deep in the appendix was a clause requiring dual sign-off for any amendments. Not just command approval, personal signatory confirmation. Mine. It wasn't just about protocol. That clause existed because of a past breach, one that nearly cost us a security rating and 3 field operations. Orion handled more than crates. They moved comms, gear, encrypted modules, occasionally even bioscan kits. Stuff that couldn't fall into the wrong hands. Without the NDA intact, any delivery could compromise data trails. Colton, in his ambition, hadn't bothered to read that far. Or maybe he didn't understand what it meant. When I saw the contract file sitting open on the shared drive, my stomach turned. His digital signature was right there, bold and proud, under a section he had no authority to touch. No consultation, no clearance, no understanding of the storm he'd just invited. I didn't say anything. I just saved a copy, highlighted the breach, and logged the timestamp. That night, I sat in my bunk and stared at the ceiling. I didn't feel anger, just clarity. It was like watching a chess match where the opponent makes the one move that seals their own loss. All I had to do now was wait. The document would surface. The vendor would question the authorization. The clause would activate. And when it did, there'd be no spinning the story. For the first time in weeks, I slept easy. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew the truth would finally weigh more than the politics. It came in at 0642. Subject line was plain. Orion Tactical Inquiry. I clicked it without thinking. The message was brief, clinical. Our office received a contract signed by Captain Hayes. Per our agreement, only Captain Monroe may authorize updates to NDA logistics parameters. Please confirm status. For a second, I just stared at the screen. Not because I was shocked, but because I knew this was the moment. The one that changes the whole tide. I clicked save, then printed 2 copies. One for my records. One for when someone up the chain would inevitably try to shift blame. By 0800, word had reached Major Kelton. I heard the rustle of boots outside the office. The tone in the hallway changed. Officers huddled in whispers. Colton walked past my door twice. Didn't say a word. Didn't look inside. The third time, I caught the flash of panic on his face. He knew. At 0847, the operations tent fell silent. A junior staffer had looped in legal from the Pentagon. They confirmed the clause. They confirmed my name. They asked who authorized the breach. No one answered. Phones lit up. The printer spat pages nonstop. Colton was nowhere to be seen. I didn't move from my desk. By 0910, I was called in. The command circle was packed. Everyone looked 10 years older. I handed over the printed email. Set it down gently, no words. Just let it sit. Like a loaded weapon they hadn't seen coming. Colonel Barrett cleared his throat twice before speaking. He didn't meet my eyes. They tried to ask questions, tried to reframe the breach, but the paper didn't care. The paper had its own weight, and everyone in that room felt it. I stayed for 10 minutes, said nothing more than I had to. When I left, no one stopped me, no one dared. The air behind me felt heavy, like the silence after a storm, right before the real damage becomes clear. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. I stood for a minute and looked toward the motor pool. Same trucks, same base, but everything had shifted. I wasn't back in charge. I didn't need to be. The truth was moving now, and nothing could stop it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm any office or send out memos. I just watched. Quietly. Every email Colton had sent, every attachment he shared, every folder he opened without clearance. It was all traceable. The system logs were automatic. Nobody thought to check them before. Now, every misstep was time-stamped and sealed. Within 48 hours, the Pentagon had flagged 6 operational briefs containing classified grid plans. One of them had been attached to a slideshow Colton presented in a strategy meeting with civilian contractors. Another had been forwarded to an unsecured tablet. The breach was wide open, and I never touched a thing. They were scrambling now, not to fix the mistake, but to prove it hadn't happened. But the evidence kept piling up. Meetings turned frantic. Commanders whispering in corners. Legal reviewing the chain of custody. The same officers who once ignored me were now flipping through documents I'd written, trying to trace the lines backward. Every time they reached my name, the trail ended clean. Because I had done it right the first time. They called me into review panels. Not as a suspect, as a witness. I brought a folder, neatly labeled. Dates, access logs, the original NDA copy signed by 2 generals. I didn't argue. I didn't gloat. I let the room sit with the weight of the facts, and when they asked if I had anything to add, I simply said no. Colton tried to speak, tried to explain, but words fall apart when trust is gone. His actions had filled every blank the brass needed. He wasn't malicious, just careless. But in this line of work, carelessness is a liability no one survives. And now, the fire he started was swallowing everything he touched. I walked out of that last meeting without needing a verdict. The truth had already spoken, not just for me, but for every soldier who ever followed the rules, stayed quiet, and trusted the system to protect what mattered. I didn't destroy him. He did that on his own. I just let it burn. The summons came on a Thursday. Formal. Signed by the Department of Defense. A high-level review at Fort Meade, attendance mandatory. I showed up in uniform, not out of obligation, out of respect. The room was full. Generals, Pentagon lawyers, intelligence advisors, and Colton, seated at the far end, eyes hollow. He looked smaller than I remembered. The weight of weeks had sunk in his shoulders. His father, retired Major General Hayes, sat 2 chairs down. He didn't speak, just stared ahead, jaw tight. The silence when I entered was sharp. I nodded to the panel, took my seat. My name was on the agenda. But the room wasn't really about me. The review officer read the findings. One by one, every breach, every failed protocol, every piece of evidence that tied back to decisions Colton had made without clearance. No one interrupted. No excuses were offered. When the list ended, they turned to me. asked if I had any corrections. I didn't. The record was accurate. That was enough. Then came the question. Captain Monroe, would you be open to returning as special liaison under your own terms? I looked around. The offer wasn't flattery, it was necessity. They needed someone who could fix what had been broken. Someone with the trust they'd just learned the hard way couldn't be replaced. I let the pause hang for a beat. Then I shook my head. I'm not going back into a system that forgot what loyalty means. I'll work, but not through the chain that erased me. If they wanted my guidance, they'd get it on contract. No rank, no politics, just clean deliverables. They agreed without hesitation. Colton didn't say a word. His father didn't look at me. But I didn't need that. What mattered was the quiet shift in that room. The recognition, not in applause, but in the way people listened when I spoke. No one questioned my records. No one softened the facts. I had done my duty, even when it cost me. I left Fort Meade with a new title, Independent Advisor, DoD Liaison Logistics. Same work, same values. But this time, on my terms, no more fighting for a seat I had already earned. I didn't walk out as a hero. I walked out as a man who knew what he was worth. And this time, so did they. The wind was sharp that morning outside the Pentagon. I stepped out into the November cold, contract folder in hand, the ink barely dry. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking back into a system that had forgotten me. I was walking forward, unbound, toward work that answered to clarity and principle. They hadn't made a ceremony of the offer. Just a quiet email, a direct contract. No rank insignia, no salute, but everything that mattered was still there. The respect, the trust. The acknowledgement that the job I'd done hadn't vanished in the noise. I'd spent too long carrying the weight of other people's blind spots. Now, I was building on solid ground. No more having to prove what I'd already delivered. No more watching lesser men speak louder. I wasn't interested in revenge, just results. As I crossed the plaza, I glanced back once. Not in longing, just a nod to what was. I'd worn that uniform with pride, but I didn't need it to stand tall. They replaced me, but they couldn't erase me.